The world was made of dust and distance. A small girl sat by the trail, a still point in a sea of shimmering heat. The wagon that left her there was now just a dark speck on the horizon, a final, fading promise. She did not cry. Tears were a luxury, a waste of water in a land that had none to spare. Her name was Mai, though no one had said it for a long time. In her small hands, she clutched a smooth, featureless wooden doll, its form worn down by worry. The sun beat down, turning the earth to a cracked canvas and her simple cotton tunic into a sweltering shroud. Silence was her only companion, a heavy blanket punctuated by the buzz of a fly and the whisper of a hot wind through brittle sagebrush. She watched an ant navigate the treacherous terrain of a rock, its journey as epic and meaningless as her own. A hawk circled high above, a patient predator in an uncaring sky. She was an island of abandonment, a detail the vast landscape had already begun to swallow. Every gust of wind carried the scent of dry earth and a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight on her small chest. She had been told to wait. And so she waited. She observed the slow crawl of shadows as the afternoon bled into evening, her resilience a silent, stubborn thing, born not of hope, but of a simple, primal refusal to cease existing. This was her world now, a forgotten spot on a forgotten trail. A place where you either took root or were blown away like chaff. She closed her eyes, not in sleep, but to feel the sun on her eyelids, the only warmth that wasn't leaving her. The grit was in her hair, on her skin, a part of her. She was becoming the dust. A sound broke the stillness. Not the wind, but something more rhythmic, more deliberate. The soft thud of hooves on packed earth. Mai opened her eyes. A man on a tall, dark horse was approaching, his silhouette stark against the bleeding orange of the setting sun. He was old, his face a roadmap of hard years and squinting into that same sun. He pulled the horse to a halt a few feet away, the animal snorting and shaking its head. The man, Arthur, said nothing. He simply sat in his saddle, his gaze taking in the small figure, the fading wagon tracks, the immense emptiness surrounding them both. His eyes weren't cruel, nor were they kind. They were merely observant, like a man assessing livestock or the likelihood of rain. He dismounted, his movement stiff but sure. He unhooked a canteen from his saddle and held it out. Mai stared at it, then at his face. His expression was unreadable. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and took it, her small hands dwarfed by the heavy metal. The water was cool and tasted of iron and life. She drank deeply, then handed it back. He took it, capped it, and returned it to its place. A long, heavy silence stretched between them, filled only by the horse's breathing. He looked at the horizon one last time, a deep sigh escaping his chest, a sound of profound weariness. He had seen this story before. He turned his gaze back to her, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than observation in his eyes. It was resolve. "You're coming with me," he said. The words were not an invitation, they were a statement of fact, as unchangeable as the setting sun. He reached down, and without waiting for an answer, lifted her small, light frame and set her in front of him on the saddle. The worn leather was warm and smelled of horse and sweat. As they rode towards a distant, solitary ranch house, Mai looked back at the empty spot on the trail, a place that no longer belonged to her. The ranch house was like the man, solid, weathered, and without ornament. It stood against the vast sky, a testament to endurance. Inside, the sparse furniture was functional, each piece worn smooth by years of use. Arthur showed Mai to a small room at the back. A simple cot with a wool blanket was her new world. He didn't offer words of comfort, only a bowl of thick, hot stew. They ate at a small wooden table, the silence broken only by the scrape of spoons against pottery. This became their ritual. Days were measured not in conversation, but in shared tasks. Mai watched Arthur mend a fence, his gnarled hands working the wire with a practiced economy of motion. She watched him tend his horses, his voice a low, soothing murmur he never used with people. She began to help, unasked. She swept the porch clean of the daily layer of dust. She carried buckets of water from the well, her small arms straining. She collected eggs from the henhouse, her touch so gentle the hens never stirred. Arthur noticed everything, but said nothing. His acknowledgement came in actions. One evening, he took her worn, splitting shoes and, by the light of a kerosene lamp, methodically stitched the leather back together with a thick, waxed thread. The repaired shoes were stronger than before. One chilly night, she found a heavy, moth-eaten wool coat, his, draped over her cot. It swallowed her whole, but it smelled of wood smoke and a faint, lingering safety. She wrapped herself in it, a small, resilient outcast finding shelter not in a home, but in the quiet, unspoken kindness of a stranger. She was a ghost in his house, but a ghost he now provided for, and that was more than she had ever known. She learned the language of his solitude, a vocabulary of shared space and silent understanding. My spirit, bent but never broken, began to uncurl in the quiet safety of the ranch. She learned the rhythms of the land, the subtle shift in the wind that foretold rain, the way the coyotes sounded different when they were hungry. She learned the horses not by name, but by their essence, the nervous energy of the bay mare, the steady gait of the old gelding. One sweltering afternoon, a young stallion, recently acquired, was wild-eyed with fear, kicking at the corral fence. Two ranch hands tried and failed to calm him, their loud words and sudden movements only making him more frantic. Arthur watched from the porch, his face set in a grim line. Mai slipped past him, moving into the dusty corral. She didn't approach the stallion directly. She simply stood, her presence small and unthreatening. She began to hum a soft, tuneless melody, a sound from a life she barely remembered. The stallion's ears twitched. His panicked rolling eye settled on her. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another. The horse snorted, but held its ground. She reached his side, her hand gently stroking the trembling, sweat-slicked neck. The great animal shuddered and then, miraculously, grew still, leaning into her touch. The ranch hand stared in disbelief. Later, as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and rose, Arthur sat beside her on the porch steps. Good with the animals, he grunted. It was a mountain of praise from a man who spoke in pebbles. He then pushed a worn, leather-bound book and a nub of charcoal into her hands. It was a ledger, its pages filled with his spidery script, but the last several pages were blank. She understood. Her first drawing was of the stallion, its powerful form captured with an untutored but intuitive grace. The bond between them deepened in the spaces between words. During a fierce thunderstorm that shook the very foundations of the small house, they sat by the fire, the crackling flames a stark contrast to the raging wind outside. The silence was no longer heavy or awkward, it was a shared comfort, a language of its own. Mai's eyes drifted to the mantelpiece, to a small, silver-framed photograph she had noticed before but never dared to examine closely. It showed a smiling woman with kind eyes and a young boy, no older than Mai herself, standing beside her. She looked from the faded image to the old man staring into the flames. Arthur saw her gaze. For a fleeting moment, a mask of profound, ancient pain tightened his features. His jaw clenched. Then, as quickly as it came, it softened into a deep, familiar sadness. He offered no explanation. He simply turned and placed another log on the fire, the hiss and pop of the burning wood filling the room. That night, Mai was jolted awake by a nightmare, the vague terror of it clinging to her like a shroud. She was wrapped in the big wool coat, but a deep chill remained. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Arthur stood in her doorway, a silhouette against the dim moonlight. He walked to her cot and gently placed a heavy, patchwork quilt over her. His hand rested on her shoulder for just a second, a brief, solid weight of reassurance, before he retreated back into the shadows. The next day, she showed him a drawing in her book, an attempt at capturing his favorite old horse. The proportions were wrong, it had the legs of a deer and the head of a mule. She looked at him, her expression serious. He squinted at the drawing, tilting his head. "Looks more like a coyote with a stomachache," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching into the rarest of sights, a smile. She smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes for the first time. The arrival was an intrusion, a violation of the ranch's sacred quiet. A fancy black carriage, pulled by two high-stepping horses, rolled up the drive, kicking up a plume of arrogant dust that settled on the porch rails and coated the windows. Out stepped a man named Thomas, dressed in a tailored city suit that seemed to shrink from the rustic surroundings. He was Arthur's nephew, though he shared none of the old man's grounded presence. His movements were quick and sharp, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing, calculating value. He barely glanced at Mai, dismissing her as he would a piece of furniture or a stray dog. "Uncle," he said, his voice smooth and condescending, "it's been too long." He breezed into the house, his polished shoes clicking on the wooden floors. His conversation was a barrage of legal terms and financial concerns. He spoke of land deeds, property taxes, and market values for cattle. "We need to get your affairs in order, Uncle. You're not getting any younger, and this land. It's a significant asset." The word asset hung in the air, cold and sterile. He orbited Arthur, a vulture circling, his words chipping away at the peace they had built. He saw the ranch not as a home, a sanctuary, but as a commodity to be leveraged and sold. Mai, standing silently in the corner, felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. Thomas's presence was a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening to wash away her fragile new world. He was the outside world, with its cruel rules and sharp edges, and he had brought it to their doorstep. The unspoken harmony of the ranch was shattered, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. The confrontation came, as Mai knew it would, on the third day. Thomas spread a sheaf of papers on the wooden table, his manicured finger tapping on a yellow document. "This," he announced, "is your father's original will. It's quite clear. The property, the livestock, everything, passes to the direct male bloodline." To me he finally turned his full, dismissive attention to Mai, who stood near the hearth. "I don't know what this arrangement is, Uncle, but it's not legally binding. What is this girl to you? A charity case? You can't just pick up strays and expect them to inherit a legacy." His words were sharp, intended to wound and to sever. Arthur sat in his chair, his face like carved granite. His silence seemed to fuel Thomas's aggression. "She has no name, no papers, no right to be here. She is a liability. When you're gone, what happens then? She becomes a squatter on my land." I felt the sting of his words, the familiar feeling of being unwanted, of having no place. But this time, it was different. Fear was replaced by a cold, quiet anger. This was her home. This man, with his fancy clothes and legal papers, did not understand the land, did not know the soul of the place. She looked at Arthur, saw the weariness in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand. The fight was draining him. She would not let this stranger break him. She straightened her small back, and instead of retreating into the shadows, she took a step forward, placing herself not behind Arthur, but beside him. A silent declaration. A united front. Thomas let out a short, derisive laugh. "Look at that. A little watchdog. What can she do? She doesn't even belong here." The challenge was made, a line drawn in the dust of the quiet house. Thomas believed his victory was assured, a simple matter of law and inheritance. He saw an old man and a nameless child. He failed to see the strength that had taken root in the arid soil of the ranch. While Thomas continued his monologue about titles and lineage, Mai slipped out of the house. The air outside was clean and honest. She walked directly to the corral where the wild stallion stood. The horse saw her and trotted over, nuzzling its head against her shoulder. She took hold of its mane, and with no need for a bridle or saddle, led the powerful animal to the front of the house, where it stood as calm as a lamb. She tethered it loosely to the porch rail and went into the barn, its familiar scent of hay and leather a comfort. She returned not with a weapon, but with another document. A single sheet of paper from Arthur's desk, folded neatly. It was a new deed, drawn up by the circuit judge months ago. She couldn't read the dense legal language, but she had watched Arthur sign it, his hand steady and deliberate. And at the bottom, below his signature, was her own name, painstakingly copied by her own hand, Mai. She walked back into the tense room and stood before her accuser. She held the paper out to Thomas. Her gaze was level, her hand unwavering. This was her claim. Not one of blood, but of belonging. Of care. Arthur watched her, and a slow, proud light filled his tired eyes. He rose from his chair, his strength seemingly drawn from her courage. He placed a hand on her shoulder and faced his nephew. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and clear, carrying the weight of the land itself. "The land belongs to those who care for it," he said, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. "She cares for it." "It's hers." Thomas stared, dumbfounded, at the girl, the old man, and the paper, his legal arguments turning to ash in his mouth. Defeated by a force he could not comprehend, Thomas gathered his papers and left without another word. The clatter of his departing carriage was a sound of relief, and as the dust settled, the quiet rhythm of the ranch returned, stronger and more resonant than before. The confrontation had not broken them, it had forged them. Mai was no longer a shadow or a guest. She was the future. The seasons turned, rolling across the plains in waves of green, then gold, then white. Mai grew with them, her limbs lengthening, her knowledge of the land deepening until it was as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. She learned to read the clouds, mend the fences, and birth a foal in the dead of a winter's night. She rode beside Arthur, her silence now a comfortable companionship, their bond unbreakable. The ranch thrived under their shared stewardship. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she was mending a tear in the old wool coat, her coat now, its fabric a patchwork of memories and repairs. The question had rested in her heart for years, a silent, wondering thing. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "That day, on the trail. Why did you stop for me?" Arthur didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the vast expanse of land, his land, her land. A lifetime of unspoken pain and quiet resolve was in his profile. He was silent for a long time, the wind carrying the only sound. "Because," he finally said, his voice raspy with emotion he rarely showed, "someone should have." The words were an answer and a confession, a key that unlocked the story of the faded photograph on the mantel and the deep well of sadness in his eyes. He had not just saved her, he had saved a part of himself. Years passed like fence posts along a dusty road, each one marking time. Arthur was laid to rest on a small hill overlooking the homestead, a place where the wind always blew and you could see the entire valley. Mai was a young woman now, her face etched with the same quiet strength and resilience as the man who had raised her. She ran the ranch not with an iron fist, but with an open hand and a deep, intuitive understanding that came from love. The horses knew her touch, the land knew her step. She was its guardian, its heir in spirit and in truth. One late autumn afternoon, she was riding the far fence line, checking for breaks before the first snow. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. And then she saw it. A small, huddled shape by the side of the trail. Her heart seized. She rode closer. It was a young boy, no more than 6, his clothes tattered, his face smudged with dirt and tears. He was clutching a ragged piece of a blanket, his small body trembling from cold and fear. He looked up as her shadow fell over him, his eyes wide with the terror of the abandoned. The scene was a perfect, heartbreaking echo of her own past. The world fell away, and for a moment, she was both the woman on the horse and the child in the dust. She dismounted slowly, her movements calm and unthreatening. She unhooked her canteen and held it out. He hesitated, then snatched it, drinking greedily. She waited, her patience as vast as the land around them. She looked at the empty trail stretching in both directions, then back at the boy. The cycle had come full circle. She extended her hand. "You're coming with me." One small act of kindness can echo through generations. It doesn't cost a dime to be a decent human being. What echo will you leave behind? If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe for more tales that matter.